page and I haven't spoken to you for a while. I'm really been excited to talk to you. I know you bought your dig. I don't know if we're going to be using that today, but we're just going to see what happens. I know we're going to do a couple of interviews today, and the first one is going to be talk about emotions. So our next magazine that's coming out in December is on about that and how emotions trap our body and can get trapped in our body and stop us from doing what we really want to do in life, and we get trapped in that old energy, if it's a negative or perceived negative emotion. So I'd love to know your thoughts on this, and how do you work with clients to untrap these emotions and help people thrive?
Sure. Look, I probably come from the psychotherapy counselling perspective, because I'm a psychotherapist and counsellor, been doing that for 15 years, and a lot of the clients I see, predominantly it's around two things. It's either communication and or emotions.
Okay.
And often they're combined. And when I say emotions, what I mean by that is people get trapped in those old thought patterns, they get caught up in their old habits, and get caught up in anxieties, their fears, their doubts, and they really get trapped in that emotional space, and it really stops them moving forward. So my process of working with them is to really bring them back to the centre, what I call back to the choice maker, or back to the I presence, and from there we look at what needs to be changed, what emotions are blocked, and how then do we unblock them. So we have a few processes that we use in our psychotherapy to help people unblock those emotions. So,
okay, cool. Can you go through some of those? I mean, I don't know how long they are.
Absolutely, certainly can. So for instance, if a big one that comes up for people is public speaking anxiety, that's a huge one. That's a massive one. Part of a speaking group myself, and I know for myself, even I've been public speaking for many years, still that little bit of anxiety can be there sometimes. But for some people, it's such an anxiety that they cannot even get up on stage.
That's paralysing,
And it's paralysing. And what they do, they go into freeze mode. It's like, and it doesn't matter what they write on the paper or what they've prepared, it can be a point of getting up on the stage and suddenly everything they've learned just goes to pieces and they're froze.
I was there as well. I've just overcome my fear of public speaking, and it's something that I've been working on for years now. But the very first time I got on stage, I stood on stage and cried for 10 minutes. I was doing my trainer's training for neuro-linguistic programming, so of course, if I'm training to become a trainer, I need to be able to stand and public speak. Honestly, nothing come out. I didn't know what to say, and the only thing that actually came into my head to talk about was my dad's death, which made it 10 times worse.
Because it's an emotional.
But then I burnt through it. I stood there and I cried for 10 minutes. And then suddenly I was able to do it. So it was like that emotion was there and it paralysed me. But even when it's that bad, you can get through it.
Absolutely, yeah. And that raw fear is very real. The anxiety is very real. And what I say to people is, generally fear is something that's based on something that's happened to us before, where we've experienced something that's put in a position where we've been either put down, we've been scared, we've been frightened. So when we get back to that place again, the trigger goes off, the emotional trigger, and it stops us getting back into that space. So it's the fear of something from the past about projecting something into the future. So it's usually fear is generally something about the past, and doubt is usually something about the future. That's how I distinguish the two. So when people get a bit doubtful, it's something they may want to do, but fear is definitely based on something that's happened to us in the past, nearly always. And generally it's something in our childhood. So a lot of our work is about going back to that place with our client. So what we do, we get them to imagine being on stage. We get them to go into the body. Where do you feel fear? And it might be in the gut generally, it's quite a common place of fear. And then we get the client to go back into that space and feel it. We get them to feel in the whole body. And then we get them to freeze and really experience that feeling. And then we say, okay, now let it go and step out of it and look at yourself back in that position. So we leave the, if you like, the etheric imprint of that, because everything we experience is in the etheric body, and we can learn to read that etheric imprint. So we can get people to go back in that place, we get them out of it, we shake it off, we get them into a really safe place, and that can take some time to get them into that safe container. Then we say, what do you see? And it's amazing what people see in that place. They just get that memory etheric recall, and they can describe every single thing that's happening to them in that imprint. It's as if they're actually in the room, observing themselves. In fact, they are, from the etheric perspective. And then they tell the story, and then what we do, we redefine the story again and put things into place for safety, so they feel safe. And generally it's talking to the younger self, or releasing something, or building oneself up from an empowerment place so you don't receive that anymore. And then what we do, we generally, not always, but often we give that thing a sound, and we check it out from a sound vibration perspective, and we check it out by giving a new empowered sound. So we do a lot of sound
that's
therapy.
interesting.
Yeah. So for instance, if it was the fear of something that had a sound like, the client might say, well, the sound I'm feeling in that space is a contracted feeling. So then, as a practitioner, I would reflect that sound back to them as closely as I could, and get them the sense of coming into the body, and get them at some point to stop it coming in. And that's the empowerment process. Because once they keep receiving that same vibrational sound, that's what the fear is. And it just is a memory recalling this their body. So we change that behaviour by doing sound therapy and action-oriented process. So it's a lot of fun.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. It's very similar to like family constellation or constellation work and timeline therapy, where you're taking somebody out or you're disassociating them.
Yes.
And then when you're looking at hypnotherapy, you're changing the submodality of the feeling.
Yes.
So it's amazing how all of these therapies tie into each other to get amazing results.
Yeah. The difference or the specific thing about the process I use is it's not me choosing what I see, it's the client seeing what they see.
Yeah.
So I know in family constellations sometimes it's the observers who say what they see. In this one instance, in psychotherapy, like the psychophonetics, we get the client to speak it, we get the client to sound it. So I never give a sound to the client that I think might be their sound. And I'll give you an example of something that happened to me once. I was running a men's circle, and I had the Tibetan gong, and I said, okay, everybody, we're dropping into meditation, this should be a really beautiful experience. Ding! And one man said, that totally freaks me out. He said, I was a submariner off of the Russian coast in a submarine, a nuclear submarine, and when we hear that sound, it means there's a nuclear submarine coming towards us.
Yeah.
And it really made me think never to prescribe a sound to anybody, because you never know what the experience is going to be. I may think intuitively, intuition's a big thing in the coaching realms, but sometimes that intuition can be a little bit wrong, and we do more damage by intuiting, because if we're not really 100% clear on that, the client can actually have a backlash from that experience. Yeah. So for me, it's about getting the client to have the sound, have the words that are unique to them. So that's one unique thing about my work is, I never prescribe sounds. So just something I've chosen not to do.
And I think when you're looking at empowering people, you want them to bring out what's inside of them anyway.
Totally,
because we've got whatever we need within us already, but we don't always know how to access it. So a good therapist will, help the client to actually bring that out of them anyway, whether that's a sound or a feeling or a word or a picture, or you never really want to put your thoughts and feelings into somebody else.
Absolutely, yeah. Even as far as sometimes the little inspiring cards people get, they're great and they work and they're great, but when people write their own, when people can produce their own, it gives it more strength.
Yeah, because they're using their own words, and different words for different people mean different things, and some are really, really strong positive feelings, and some, they might still be positive, but they won't give that really strong attraction towards that word. Yeah, and
what one word for me might be so different from you and your vocabulary, and from your story.
Yes.
Depending, because sometimes I say to people, don't get caught up on the words, don't get caught up on the pedantics of what I'm saying. If something doesn't, particularly if I've got students with me, I said, if something's not working for you, just change that word for something that fits you. Just translate it, get your translator out and just go, okay, I'm going to translate that word magnificent to something that fits my vocabulary. Because not everything I say will resonate with people. So I say, don't get caught up on it, don't get caught up in the emotion of what I'm speaking. And this is quite often what happens in communication. People get caught, or they get the hook or the bar from one expression, one word, or one feeling, and they don't actually hear what anybody else is saying because they're still caught up on that one word or phrase, and they get caught up in that emotional control of their being because of something in the past. So it's really important to be really cautious when listening to people of those little triggers, the emotional triggers. And often it is a word or a phrase or the way you look at it across my arms or whatever I do with my body. So certainly in the counselling process, there's lots of different hand movements we use and positions we sit in, and a little bit of mimicking to make people feel comfortable. Not too much, I'm not going to do exactly what people do. But if we do something that's a little bit towards, if you're looking at your watch every couple of minutes, every time you're speaking to your client, it's going to trigger. Because they're going to be thinking, oh, is it late? Blah, blah, blah. So emotional traps are really, really strong for people. So I think it's really important to get a real sense of our own emotions, but also as therapists getting a sense of other people's emotions as well, and where they're at in their emotions. So I generally have a question for people, where are you right now in your emotions? Where are you right now in your joy, in your sorrow, in your grief, or whatever emotion you're in? Probably I'd say something about anger as well. Anger for me is a secondary emotion, because usually particularly if I work with men with anger management, which is one of those key things, it's not so much about the anger, it's what's causing the anger. So I will say, okay, the anger is the result of something. So it's not actually a primary emotion. And there's a lot of therapy out there dealing with the anger as a primary emotion. And I think it's a way of going around in circles and not getting to the core of what's going on. And often it's about frustration, lack of self-esteem, and people get angry with themselves because they're not producing something. So be cautious around that anger working emotions as well, and getting clear on what that is.
So we're talking about what the emotions are, how they're trapped in the body, how what we can just say can trigger people. Can we give advice to people that are sort of stuck in an emotion right now, whatever that be, whether it's grief or anger, and they don't know how to get out of it? What would you suggest to start moving them from where they are to a better place?
Look, one thing is, whatever emotion you're in, let's get clear on this. Let's talk about more negative emotions rather than the emotion of joy, because that's a great place to be. But if people are in a bit of a negative space, a bit of anxiety, a bit of depression, and that's quite common, the first thing I would say is get out of your seat physically and actually move. So if you're sitting down listening and you're feeling a bit anxious, I would suggest get up and change where you're sitting, change that vibration to start with. And then generally I'd say go and do something physical. Get something moving, pick up a paintbrush, pick up a pen, go for a walk, and actually change your physical environment to begin with before you even get into the emotions. And then have a look at what the emotion is. Try and name it. I'm a great believer in naming the emotion and then getting a sense of, okay, what is that emotion? What am I feeling right now? Then saying, and if I'm feeling that way, what's the next level up? So rather than aiming for, absolute bliss and joy, what's just the next thing up from where I'm feeling now? And if people can just even get to that stage, from fear you might go from fear to a bit of anxiety. From anxiety you might go into a space of a little bit of calmness, and then heading to more calmness, and then into deep meditation. But I would say do it incrementally and do it slowly, rather than trying to get to that nirvana in 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. And I think for people that are really new to this, there are emotional scales out there that you can go online and check out, and just go to Google Images and look at the emotional scale. Not saying that you have to jump from one to the other, and all charts are slightly different, but it will give you an idea of what comes between depression and ecstasy. Because you're not going to go from depression to ecstasy within one session with a client or 1 hour of meditation. Generally, there's always spontaneous things that happen. But generally, there's this incremental. It's a journey, isn't it? So it's about getting out of there on a steady note.
And the more one practices that, the quicker you can go up those scales. So it's a matter of getting in and practicing that as well. Esther and Jerry Hicks, they did the emotional scale, and they look at where you are right now and go, okay, where do you need to be to go up another level, and then another level, and another level, to that absolute place of joy. That's the ultimate place for me. I think for human beings it is our natural state to be in joy, and sometimes we just forget to be there. So it's about remembering to be there. And sometimes it's not rocket science. To feel joyful sometimes doesn't take a lot. I will say go and find your favourite food, or your favourite person, or your favourite movie, or your favourite book, and go to that. Force yourself to go to that for 5 minutes. And it's amazing how quickly it can change into that place. I love marzipan. It's just my thing. And it's a child thing. I just love marzipan. And if I'm feeling a bit flat or I need to pick me up, I'll go to the supermarket, the local shop, and I'll buy a big block of sweet, sugary marzipan, and I'll break some off. And I'm in joy as soon as that hits my taste buds. So that's my...
It's making me smile because I like it too. I don't do that, but I do like it.
So there's a few things, And I'm a didgeridoo player, and if I'm feeling a bit flat, I know that the didge is going to lift me up. So I'll go and play my didge. If I need something a bit bigger, I'll go and have a game of golf, or go for a massage, and I'll go for that next lift up. Or I'll ask my partner, I'll ask Ali, and I'll say, right now I need a hug, or I need something from you. And that's always a good thing, to find somebody that can give us something to fill that emotional need. I think it's really important to know what the triggers are, but know what the remedies are.
Yeah.
You know, like your marzipan and your, sugar.
I'm a huggy person,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
anyone,
yeah.
I'll hug anyone.
Yeah, I just need a hug. I need a hug. And it's good to know what our needs are.
Yeah.
I need is a great word. Right now, what I need is, and it doesn't matter about the story around it, but right now, just to get me through this, I need some marzipan, or I need a hug, or I need a cry, or I need a walk. And it's good to have that in the relationship, particularly, where you can express that and receive it.
Yeah.
I think that's one really important part of emotions.
Yeah.
Recognise a trigger and then move on.
Having the discipline to be able to give yourself time to, the space to snap out of it. So for me, I get frustrated a lot with the computer because I'm not a technical person and I do a lot of technical work. And then sometimes it doesn't work and I'm like, ah. So what I used to do in the past is just keep getting frustrated, turning into anger and then wanting to throw the computer. But now I'm like, okay, I'll just go for a walk. I put my music on in my ears and I go for a walk for an hour and I come back and generally I've calmed down enough to actually work the problem out. Yeah. And then the emotion just changes anyway and then I've got joy because I'm like, oh my god, I've solved it, I'm a genius. And so it really doesn't take much sometimes to be able to change.
Yeah. And it really is removing oneself from that position, getting out of the chair, moving away from it, having a cup of tea or whatever it is, or whatever it is you need to do to change the dynamic. Because if you're sitting in that astral cloud, if you're sitting in that emotional cloud and it's a bit dark, it's hard to get out of it sometimes.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to force ourselves, really step into our presence and say, I need to get out of this. And that's usually the hardest time.
Yeah.
Depression, for people who are in depression, in that emotional state of depression, the hardest thing about depression is stepping out of it.
Yeah.
And if you have a support system, or if you don't have the awareness of the triggers or the mechanism to step out of them, it can be a very dark place, and that's the challenge of depression. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about depression is get active, get creative, change the energy flow, get the blood flowing again, and stop sitting in or standing in that dark space, bring in some light. But it's hard, it's easier said than done.
Oh yeah, it really is. Yeah. It's really, for somebody in that space right now, just watching, I think it's really interesting to look at people who have depression and look at their body posture, because they won't be standing up like this and they won't have their head up. They're usually down and they're usually hunched, and with people with anxiety, they're all curled in as well.
Contraction,
so it's the emotions are so interwoven with body posture. Yeah. So I think that you can change that instantly, because if you're feeling depressed and you make yourself sit up, your body can't feel depressed when you're looking up and seeing light. Yeah. It's a really, really good trick to change something very fast. Yeah. Obviously then you're going to have a look at the underlying, what's causing it, but to actually feel better straight away, I think it's a really lovely thing to do.
I've actually got a friend, and probably going back about 9 years ago, she came to me for some counselling support, and she was going through a pretty dark time in her life, and she came into my studio and sort of tuned in, and she told me what she wanted. She basically wanted to get God back into her life and create some light. So after some discussion, I put a candle on the table and a box of matches. I said, when you're ready to bring light back in, you can light the candle. It was 45 minutes of silence. I didn't speak, she didn't speak, and after 45 minutes, she found the courage and took a big breath, and she struck a match and she lit the candle. And I still see her now, 9 years later, and she says that was a turning point in her life. And it was the most silent session I've probably ever given anybody, because it was about her finding her own strength. It wasn't about me. I couldn't give it to her. Yeah. Had I wanted to, I couldn't have given it to her. It was her finding that inner spark. And I said, if you can just find that inner spark and the courage and the will to strike the match and light that little wick, and then take that as your metaphor and bring that in. And she did, and now she's just seen her recently. She's in a really great space, new relationship, the job of her dreams, everything's going right for her. And she still reckons that was a shifting point for her 9 years ago to help her on that journey. Otherwise, it would have been easy to go into depression. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's not rocket science, it's just taking the time to be with somebody and working out what they need. And for her, it was just to light a candle. A beautiful process. It's one of my most memorable sessions I've ever had with anybody. Particularly because it was so quiet and silent, and deep silence, a painful silence as well, and tears. And, so the emotions can be shifted in many, many ways, and sometimes it's simply as striking a match and lighting a candle. So that might be a good thing for the viewers here if you're feeling a bit flat. just light a candle and say a prayer, or do something to change the energy, bring in that light physically, and then from an energetic perspective as well.
Nice. I also like to give people tasks to do as well, because a lot of time, well, most times when we feel stuck in our life and we have these emotions, whether it's fear or anxiety that are keeping us stuck, it's because we're feeling unworthy and we're not good enough, or we've got the imposter syndrome, or there's so much going on within us. But anyone on the outside of you can see the light that you are already, and they know that you're capable. And so there's this really real imbalance between how you're feeling about yourself and how others see you. And I think it's really great to reach out to people and ask them, what do you think of me? If you can give me 3 words. Now I know that's quite confronting if you do it one-on-one, but if you can put on your Facebook, or out to your friends in a letter and say, hey, my coach has asked me to do this task. What are 3 words that describe it? It's amazing how people see you, and that for me, I had my coach do that for me. It was the most amazing thing for me, because I was very down on myself and beating myself up all the time, and I hated myself, and I wouldn't give myself lunch breaks, and I wouldn't train, and I wouldn't give myself anything. There was all of this self-hate going on, and she got me to do that, and the amount of beautiful words that come back to me is amazing. It's really powerful.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
There's so many little things that you can do. You've just got to have the courage to do that very first thing. And blame it on your coach, whether you've got a coach or not. So I've got a coach, she's asked me to do this, and do it, and see what happens. See how that changes within you when people reflect to you that beautiful, the words that they're saying about you.
And that's the thing, is that make sure that it's a positive reflection from them as well, and say, can you feed me something positive, or what you see from me? And I would suggest also, if they do that, to write it down and keep that. One exercise.
I made a little Wordle.
It's brilliant.
It's really
I love
nice.
doing that. So one of the exercises I do in my work, and it's also in my book as well, that I ask people to do, is called a 3-word homeopathic poem, and you write down 20 positive words about yourself or about another, and then you wheedle them down. And there's a process around this, where you end up with 3 words, and they're the most empowering words out of the whole 20. And then I get people to write them down. I am, beautiful, talented, and gorgeous. And then write it down, print it off, and put it somewhere prominent. Put it on the mirror, put it on the computer, and every day read it as your manifestation to yourself. I am gorgeous, I'm beautiful, I'm talented. And if we tell ourselves that often enough, that the old subconscious brain after a while starts to believe it, and then we start feeling better about us. And in fact, the blood changes. If you do live blood analysis, I don't know if you've heard this, but if you do live blood analysis before a session and get people in a positive state and do another live blood analysis, the white blood cells and the red blood cells actually change into positive. I've seen that done after coaching sessions. It's so profound that it even changes the blood in the body. It's pretty amazing. So.
Wow, great.
So
well, I think that's great. We've given them some really good tips to know how to change their emotions. So if anyone wants to find you, to work with you, where will they find you?
Probably my website, adrianhanks.com. They can go there and have a look, and then contact me through there, and also Facebook page, adrianhanks.com.
Cool. Thank you so much for coming in again.
Okay. Lovely to see you again. So, thank you.